Rock DIY or do it you. I'm pretty excited about this project. I get to make my first part with the recycled plastic I've been collecting for a while. If you're interested in repurposing plastic or specifically HDPE number 2 plastic, check out my channel for the video. I'm not excited about having to replace a part on my CNC machine, but at least the part I need to replace is made out of HDPE, and I just happen to have some. This is the part that broke on my CNC. On this, which is part of this. I'm going to make the part out of this recycled plastic, and then that will turn into this, which will become this, and ultimately be a part of this. This is now my third repair on my CNC Shark HD4. So I've already had to replace this piece here, but rather than ordering it, I made a replica out of oak, and it's held up pretty well. But now my router clamp snapped where the bolt holds it in place, even though there's an upper clamp and a lower clamp. The top one split, which you may be able to see right there. So I super glued it, but I know it's not going to last. So I'm going to go back to one of my original YouTube video projects where I'm repurposing plastic or recycling plastic. So since this is made out of HDPE, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to make one out of my plastic that I've been keeping and shredding for a while, and we'll see how it all turns out. I put the upper router clamp and lower router clamp together with 4 bolts, and then there's nuts that go on the bottom side. These 3 are good to tighten down, but until you get the router in, don't tighten this one down, because this hole is actually slotted to allow this piece to be pulled into this piece. So it's slotted right here. So if you tighten it all the way down and then you go to clamp it down, it's probably what's going to cause this to snap off. I don't believe that is why this snapped off. It just seems to be something that's happening with this plastic or HDPE lately. I've had this router or the CNC for 7 years now, and it's been set up the same way, so it's not like I just happened to tighten this down and snap this off. It's been, besides changing out the router probably 4 years ago, that's not what caused it to break off. So right now this piece is super glued back on, and we'll see what happens. And just like that, I don't know why I bothered even attempting to glue this back on. I knew it was going to happen, so I don't know why I bothered. But just trying to put the router back into the collars, well, just the top collar, it snapped right off. For this project, I'm going to use all this recyclable plastic that I already have, and I have to cut it up in small pieces, blend it, and then I'm going to have to put it in this toaster oven to melt it down. And I'm going to have to make sure I melt it really good, just to keep any air pockets or gaps in the plastic. And then what I'll do is I'll put it in here, and I have my dimensions for my router clamp that broke, and so I know that it needs to be 5 1/4 by 4 7/8. So I'm gonna make it bigger than that, and then it's also 3/4 inch thick, and I'm gonna make it thicker than that so that I can plane or flatten the top and bottom on it, just to make sure that it's a nice flat piece when it's finally made into the router clamp. I do have some previous pieces of HDPE #2 recyclable plastic. I haven't used them for anything, but the stuff is pretty solid when you melt it down. This piece right here, I mean, you can't bend it or anything. It's pretty solid. So we'll see what happens. I now have the melted plastic, or HDPE 2, in my jig or mold, and it's all clamped down, and I'm gonna let it sit until it cools down, because I've learned in the past that even though you can put it in the jig or the mold and take it out and it'll be formed, I think as it cools down it tends to warp the plastic. So I'm going to keep it in here just to make sure it stays flat, even though I'll be clearing the top and bottom of it to make it 3/4 inch thick. I just want to avoid too much warpage. And when I say warpage, I've had pieces that I put in this and then pulled them out soon afterward, and they kind of look like a brain as they cool down. And becomes pretty solid, but like to keep it flat. So I use the DeWalt planer on the repurposed plastic that I'm using to make the CNC clamp. Worked okay. Did put some gouges in the plastic. It kind of got held up and stalled a little bit, so the blades kind of burrowed it a little bit, and then it continued out. I made quite a few passes, and on the wheel I only did a 1/4 turn at a time as I ran it through. And then I also have this dust stopper. And if you hook it up exactly this way with the hose going like that, and this is a hose that comes with it, but if you hook it up on the back of the DeWalt planer to the pickup hose attachment, nothing shoots out here. It all stays in the bucket. Otherwise, all those plastic shavings would have been out there somewhere. But it worked pretty well. These are all the plastic shavings after running it through the planer. This would have made a pretty good mess had I just allowed it to shoot out the back of the planer, but it's all in the bucket. Yes, I am still using the same broken CNC with the broken router clamp, but it's still pretty sturdy, and I'm only doing 1/32 passes in order to clear the top of this piece of recycled plastic. This is the plastic router clamp cut out on the CNC. The side-by-side comparison of the old and new. I still have to trim the edges with a miter saw on the repurposed plastic piece. You can see here that I had to recut my bolt holes because I didn't take into account that I did have some excess on one side that needed to be cut off with a miter saw. So it threw my bolt holes off. After doing some touch-up side trimming with the miter saw, it fit just like the old one. Other than the color, you really don't notice any difference. It functions like it's supposed to. And there you go, out with the old and in with the new. Pretty happy with how this project turned out in the end. Please like, comment, or subscribe. Thanks again.